Blood was pooling under his eyebrow, and the last thing he heard before the garage door rumbled shut was his own son telling his wife not to bother. "He'll be fine. Let's go. We'll be late." Then the kitchen went quiet except for the tick of the ceiling fan and the sound of his own breathing. My name is Thomas Reyes. I'm 69, and for 30 years, I ran an electrical supply company out of a warehouse in Fort Wayne, Indiana. I sold it 8 years ago and turned the money into a paid-off house, a small strip mall downtown, and 2 rental duplexes near the community college. My wife died of cancer 4 years back, and after that, the house got quiet enough that I stopped noticing how much space other people were taking up in it. My son Caleb moved back in with his wife Priya when he was 32, saying they just needed 18 months to get back on their feet while his brewery found its footing. Priya sat across from me at dinner that first week and said this house had always felt like home to her. I wanted to believe that. Grief makes a man generous with his trust. 6 months in, I was sleeping in the guest room. Priya had rearranged the living room to her taste. Caleb parked a second car in the driveway I'd cleared from my truck. When I brought up the 4 months of unpaid rent on his taproom, he told me to think long-term, like I was the one being unreasonable. Then the brochures started showing up on my nightstand. Assisted living facilities, tucked under a book or a folded shirt, never mentioned out loud. At dinner, Priya would ask, almost gently, if the stairs were getting harder, if I was still seeing my doctor. I didn't understand yet that they were building a story about me, one where I got smaller every week. It came apart on a February night, cold enough to make my knuckles ache. I'd been out fixing a drain at one of the duplexes, and when I walked back into my own kitchen, Caleb was standing there with a manila envelope and the kind of calm face a man wears when he's rehearsed something. Inside were 3 documents, a deed to the house, a deed to the duplexes, and paperwork handing him control of my strip mall, including the space his own brewery sat in. He wanted it signed that night. I asked him what gave him the right. He didn't raise his voice, which is what unsettled me most. He said I was getting older. He used the word liability about my own mind, standing in my own kitchen. I told him I'd run those properties for over a decade without a single missed payment, and that my patience was the only reason his brewery still had a roof. That's when Priya crossed the kitchen and shoved me with both hands. I caught the bar stool with my heel. My head found the granite edge on the way down, and then the tile came up fast. I didn't black out, but the room tilted sideways and stayed there. I heard Caleb say her name once, not out of concern for me, but like a warning about how this would look. Then he told me I'd be fine. He picked the envelope up off the floor near my feet and walked out behind his wife. Once the garage door closed, I lay there and did something I'd learned from an old construction accident years back. I breathed through it instead of fighting it, and while I breathed, I thought about the one thing Caleb didn't know. 2 years earlier, when his brewery was 6 months from collapse and buried under supplier debt, he'd sat at that same table and cry. I never wrote him a check. Instead, I spent 2 days with my attorney, David Kessler, forming a company called Northgate Capital. Northgate quietly bought a stake in Caleb's brewery and guaranteed his loan, looking on paper like some outside investor had believed in him. He never once suspected it was me. Buried in that guarantee was a single clause. If fraud, assault, or elder abuse was ever proven, Northgate could call the loan immediately and take everything back. From the kitchen floor, I called David, told him to activate that clause, move every property I owned into a trust before sunrise, and then call an ambulance. At the hospital, I told the officer I'd slipped on wet tile. He looked at the bruising on my shoulder that didn't match a fall and wrote it down anyway. 8 stitches, 1 night for observation. The next morning, Caleb and Priya arrived with the same envelope, plus a new page, medical power of attorney. I signed it all, slow and tired, like a man giving up. What they didn't know was that every property I owned had already moved into a trust I didn't personally control. Their signatures were worth nothing the moment the ink dried. By Thursday, Caleb's accounts were frozen. The brewery's equipment sat under legal hold, tied to an elder abuse case backed by my own kitchen security footage. Time-stamped, unedited, already in a detective's hands. When he finally called me that night, his voice had lost its calm. He asked who was behind Northgate Capital. I told him it was me. 11 seconds of silence followed before he said one word. Dad. I told him about the clause, the footage, the district attorney. I told him I loved him, and that love was the reason I'd funded his dream in secret for 2 years. But love hadn't made him decent, and now he'd have to live with what came after. The following Monday, Priya was arrested at a hair salon. Caleb was arrested at his own taproom, a bank notice already taped to the glass door. He pleaded guilty that spring. 3 years, parole eligible in 18 months. Priya fought the charges and lost 4 years. I spent that season healing. By April, I was walking 4 miles along the river without a cane. The scar above my eye has faded to a thin ridge. I don't bother hiding anymore. A young veteran runs a sandwich shop in the old tap room now, and she keeps a table open for me every Thursday, a kindness I never asked for and never turned down. The guest room down the hall still sits empty. I haven't decided what to do with it. My son will be eligible for parole soon, and I still don't know what I'll say if he calls. What I know is that I loved him enough to build his future in silence, and it wasn't enough to make him good. But I also know a man who built a life once from nothing can always build it again, and this time I intend to build it on my own terms. If Thomas's story moved you, hit like, tell us in the comments what you would have done in his place, and subscribe to Aftermath Tales for more powerful stories like this one.